The first night I moved in, my reflection blinked when I did not. I told myself it was fatigue. The late train, boxes stacked like small, suspicious sculptures, a week of bad coffee. The house on Greystone Avenue looked fine in daytime. A melancholy Victorian with cracked stone steps and a garden that had given up, a place cheap enough for a recent grad to call temporary sanctuary. The landlord was polite, his voice the color of cheap wool. And when he handed me the keys, he said only this: "The house has character." He did not say that character keeps its own hours. On the second night, doors began to open a fraction. A hallway door would be closed one moment and bowed out a hair the next. The attic hatch would lower as if a patient hand had prodded it. I blamed drafts, a shifting house, the way old wood learns to breathe. My friends called me dramatic, and I laughed along because laughter feels like plaster in a crack. Temporary, dulling. After a week, small things gathered into a list I could no longer ignore. Photographs were shifted by the width of a breath. A teacup, settled on a saucer, moved half an inch, as if someone had leaned and inhaled. My phone's camera app would open at 3:15 each morning. When I scrolled through the automatic snaps later, there was always a frame showing me asleep, shoulders slack, mouth open, and in the black beyond my bed. Standing, silent, a woman in old clothes, hair loose, like dark rope. Each image blue. I began to keep a log. Patterns comfort the mind. They suggest discoverable reasons. On paper, I wrote down the times, the sounds, a soft scratch behind the staircase sometimes, the way the gas boiler sighs like a sleeping creature, and the moments when the mirror fogged even in the dead of winter, someone drawing an invisible finger down the glass. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who kept pigeons and a chest of memories, told me a piece of the story in a voice that had accepted truth as thin as tissue. "Before you, someone lived here for a while," she said, folding her hands in her lap like she folded away regrets. "A family, they were decent enough. The mother, her eyes lost the path. She stopped going out. People said she wandered at nights. They say she was lonely. They say she was not lonely in the way you think. She vanished one winter, and the house kept smelling of lavender for weeks after. The husband moved to Scotland. A year later, his letters stopped. I pressed for details but got the faint outline of grief. Old towns hoard rumors like keepsakes, passing them like coins. I tried to shake it off, to be modern, to overlay my fear with rational light. Mold, drafts, poor wiring. But rationality felt like a thin shirt against a storm. On a November evening, the power cut at 9:12 p.m. I brushed aside a book and lit a candle, the flame soft and timid in the room. A whisper rode the draft from the corridor like a child's breath. "Ethan." It said my name and stretched it. An ache laid along the syllables. The voice sounded both near and impossibly far, as if poured from a corridor that existed between seconds. I followed the whisper to the landing. The attic hatch was open. I would later tell myself I went because fear sharpens curiosity, or because an animal could be trapped. The ladder creaked beneath me. Motes spun in the beam of my torch like stars being swallowed. At the attic's far edge sat a vanity, an antique mirror with a brass frame webbed by a crack that spread like ice. The glass held the room backward, a W-orled in reverse. In that reversed room, I did not see myself. I saw a woman, pale and thin as paper, hair loose and dark like seaweed. Her eyes were shadow hollows. She lifted her hand and the glass fogged around her finger like a bruise. The air shifted as if a door had closed. "You're in my house," she breathed. Not a sentence so much as a folding of air around my ears. I felt something clutch the inside of my wrist, cool and tentative. It was the gentle hold of human loneliness, the way someone reaches and hopes you will not pull away. But the fingers were ice and old. They did not fit any warmth I knew. I ran, I slammed the hatch. I hammered a nail through the wood as if I could pin her behind the planks and be done. In the morning, the nails lay on the floor in a tidy row, untouched and obedient to some logic the house understood without me. The attic hatch hung ajar like a mouth that had changed its mind. Sleep left me. I told myself that would be the end. I left the lights on, I chained the doors. For a time, I convinced myself tasks, lists, chores, the small tyranny of a schedule would be a salve. Yet, at 3:15 a.m., the silence split. The house made a noise like a dropped needle, like a throat swallowing words. My phone camera activated despite my shutting it. And when I saw the photo the next day, I did what so many rational people do. I laughed in the face of evidence, a laugh that tastes of denial. The next event fused the strands of the story into a rope I could not unbind. I found a journal wedged between the floorboards beneath my bedroom. The pages were brittle and smelled of lavender and damp. The handwriting was precise and small, as if the writer had been trained to keep thoughts compact to avoid drawing attention. I read the entries by lamplight, each page a small confession. They were written by a woman named Lydia, dated over a decade ago. At first she wrote of ordinary things. The groan. October 2nd, I said hello today, and there was no one. The mirror looked back like the space where someone should live. I put lavender on the sill because the smell keeps the bad thoughts at bay. Jonathan says I worry too much, that the house is settling. He goes to work and comes home with pockets of coal in his shoes. October 17th, I woke at 3:15. There was someone at the foot of the bed. I said, please go away. The fingers on the glass write my name in water. Jonathan thinks I imagine the shadows. He took the mirror to the attic. He nailed the hatch. He does not hear the whisper. Ixtija, October 29th. The whisper tells me to stay. It says, stay with your hands folded like this, and I will come to you. It says the house is a thing that remembers the ones who leave. I tried to leave. The road outside closed like a blank page. My car would not start. The air would twist in front of me like breath on glass. I felt the weight of someone at my back, a grief leaning. And then the last jagged entry, scrawled across the page as if in a hurry. November 3rd. I put the mirror in the attic myself. The house cries for it. I cannot sleep. I am ready to leave. The voice is kind. It says it remembers the sound of rain. It says it remembers the sound of names. If I try to leave, it tells me the doors are not mine. If I stay, it promises it will keep me. Tonight, I will climb the attic stairs, and I will look into the mirror. I am frightened and I cannot say why. Lydia, her handwriting stops. The rest of the pages are blank, thin as skin. I took the journal to Mrs. Carter and watched her hands tremble on the well-worn teacup. She did not act surprised. She nodded, as if the house had whispered this to her years before. It keeps them, she said, looking into the kettle as though it might answer. It keeps the ones who listen. I tried to burn the journal. The pages cindered like bones and left a residue that smelled stubbornly of lavender. After that night, I sealed the attic door with 2 bolts and a metal bar and slept with the curtains drawn. I told myself the domestic violence of superstition would be as easily barricaded as the attic. What I learned, slowly and in the shape of panic, was that houses like Greystone do not behave like machines. They behave like animals. Memory is instinct. Someone had given it a shape to hold on to. In this case, the mirror. And the mirror sang her into being. When I nailed the hatch and forced the house's mouth shut, it simply found the other ways to breathe. It began to make itself known in the wide, honest truth of my life. The kettle boiled, but the water was cold. My walking shoes filled with sand, though my floor was swept. Friends who came to dinner left shaking, with the look of actors who have just read the ending and don't know how to move on. Once my reflection blinked while I stood still at the basin, and in the mirror beside the basin, the woman cupped her face and smiled like someone apologizing. By the time winter set, my reluctance had been stitched to a steady terror. I could not stay. I arranged the boxes, called movers, tried to sell the idea of urgency to my rational mind. I organized the van, packed a bag, tucked the journal into a carrier's crate. But when I stepped out into the driveway, the car refused to start. I tried again and again. The engine turned like bone. When I rushed back inside, the front door latched itself. The keys vanished from my pocket even though I had just clutched TT'd. I grew mean with fear. Fear does not encourage diplomacy. It pushes, it demands. I sat on the couch with my housebound boxes and shouted things that had been unspoken for years. Who are you? Why do you keep them? Let them go. The walls gave no answer, only a pressure like heavy breath. That night, I dreamed. In the dream, I stood in the room and watched the mirror fall open. The woman stepped out graceful, her feet not touching the floor. When she spoke, her voice was a chorus of voices. Every quiet thing that had been left behind in the house. We are the space between leaving and staying, she said. We are what memories do when no one remembers us properly. We are the hands that hold. I woke with a start, a thin ribbon of blood on my palm, as if someone had pinched skin in sleep. The attic hatch was open, faint light leaking through the crack, like something bleeding. I went up. On the vanity sat the mirror as if it had been placed tenderly. There was no dust in its frame. In the glass, the room looked different, brighter, close, as if the mirror could fold the world into a smaller understanding. The woman stood behind the glass like a portrait that breathes. But when I reached, my fingers met the cold of glass, and in the touch, I felt every hand that had ever touched it. Soft palms, knuckles, the ache of a mother rocking a child, the impatience of a man wiping sweat from his brow. To be seen, she said, to be finished. Then she lifted her hand, my hand, and pressed it to the glass. The surface yielded, a cool pulse. I felt my skin divide like pages. For a second, the attic tilted, the boards below dissolving into a long corridor of reflected rooms. In every reflection, a different version of myself moved. One asleep, one writing, one digging in the garden, one watching the other from inside the mirror. The last one smiled. The light in that reflection was wrong, sunken, almost underwater. I pulled back and fell against the boards. The attic air thickened. Something whispered behind me, close as breath. Stay, stay until someone remembers you properly. When I stumbled downstairs, the morning had already broken, but the clocks all showed the same hour. 3:15. Days after, people say, I was seen walking through the village, polite, pale, carrying boxes back into the house instead of out. But I do not remember that. I only know that every night at 3:15 the house inhales, the wallpaper breathes, the dust folds itself into words that spell my name. The mirror waits, patient as forgiveness. I tried once more to leave. I walked to the edge of the property where the hedges meet the road. The air there bends, strangely, as if it refuses to let you step through. I threw a stone, and it vanished like ink into water. I screamed until my throat tore. Only silence answered. The silence of a thing that already owns your sound. After that, I stopped trying. Instead, I began to speak to the house, as one does to an animal one hopes will not bite. I told it stories, small ones at first. The names of books, the scent of rain, the pattern of birds on the telephone wire. It listened. Sometimes it answered. Once the fire burned in the grate, though I had not lit it. And on the mantel, someone had written in the dust, "We remember you." But that was the moment I understood Lydia was never gone. The mirror had only rewritten her into the house. She was in the breath of the walls, in the chill of the window glass, in the pause before my reflection blinked. And maybe in time I would be too. The journal reappeared 3 weeks later, lying open on the desk, though I had burned it. The new page, written in my handwriting though I had not written it, said, December 1st. It says I write beautifully when I listen. The ink was still wet. It has been a year since anyone saw me at the market. The postman leaves letters on the step that vanish by evening. Mrs. Carter moved away. The house she left behind burned in the summer, though no one saw flame, only smoke that smelled faintly of lavender. I am still here. The mirror stands in the attic, though the attic is now the entire house. I walk its corridors and see myself everywhere, rehearsing small kindnesses, adjusting a frame, lighting a candle. I am endless repetition. Sometimes the mirror shows me the street outside, but no matter how I run, I return to the same hallway, the same soft sound of my name in another's mouth. They say the new owner will arrive next spring. If you are reading this, perhaps you are standing now in my study, the board soft underfoot, the air sweet and heavy. If you find the mirror, and you will, look closely. You may see a hand lift to greet you. You may see me waiting. You may see the lavender in bloom, the cat, the woman, the dust, folding itself into a single word. Stay. And if you hear a whisper that sounds like your own voice, whatever you do, do not answer it. If this story chilled you, remember, it is not the house that haunts us. It is what we leave behind that learns to speak